Welcome, John, again for item 12. This is the East-West link. John, would you introduce the item, please? And members, we do have an amendment on this from Councillor Denise Lee, and I will second. I'll put on the table, though, A, B, and C. Councillor Lee, would you like? Oh no, you can't move. Can't move. I need to. I'll move, and with another councillor to second to allow you to move your amendment. Standing orders won't allow you to move in the first instance. So I will move A, B, and C. Do I have a second for A, B, and C? Councillor Simpson, thank you. And I'm now going to take an amendment from, by addition, from Councillor Denise Lee. Councillor Denise Lee, would you like to? And we'll put it up.
That is on the screen. Yep.
And then, members, what I want, if we can keep the amendment on the screen, Councillor Denise Lee has been working through this with staff, and I'm hearing that staff are in support of this amendment. Thank you, Councillor Lee. But if we can keep the amendment on the board, and it is now moved by Councillor Denise Lee, is there a second to the amendment?
I will.
It has to be, you can't be either me or yourself. Do I have a second to the amendment?
Just reading it. Yeah, go on.
Yep. Member Kohanare, thank you, Member Hinare. So I will just now take Mr. Dogood to introduce the item.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have just two PowerPoint slides that I'd like to pull up, if we may. Really just to give some context for those of you who are not that familiar with the project, although I expect many of you are. So it is a very significant proposed roading connection between State Highway 1 and State Highway 20. NZTA, New Zealand Transport Agency, are the proponents of the project on behalf of the government. There has been consultation with the community over the last 18 months to 2 years on the project, and maybe so. This is the current preferred alignment from the New Zealand Transport Agency. This is the direction they're heading in after considering a number of options. It's probably not that clear there, but the road is that green line going from the right to the left-hand side of the screen, connecting the Mangere Bridge area right through to State Highway 1 in the vicinity of Sylvia Park Road, Mount Wellington. It does run predominantly along the northern edge of the Mangere Inlet and across Anns Creek to the east. So that's the preferred alignment at present. If we could flick to the next slide, please. We just have a timeline. Oh, I have the power to do that. So. Right, timeline. So just rewinding to March 2012, Auckland Plan, the Council's Auckland Plan identified the east connection known as the East-West Link as one of the top 3 strategic transport projects for Auckland, along with the City Rail link and an additional crossing over the Waitemata Harbour. NZTA at that point in March 2012 developed and analysed a number of different options, 6 different routes. They were consulted on in October 2014. Then bringing things forward to middle of this year, July 2016, the Auckland Development Committee of the former term of council supported NZTA's proposal that this is a matter of national significance under the Resource Management Act, and therefore should be considered by a board of inquiry managed by what's known as the Environmental Protection Agency Authority. So Council did support that in July of this year. Council staff have given feedback on technical matters to New Zealand Transport Agency since then. And the next part of the timeline, that's really where we're at now, August through to December, NZTA finalising the documentation, looking to lodge a notice of requirement to designate the route, and they're looking to lodge that in the next couple of weeks. 16th of December is the proposed lodgement date. That would mean a submission period in February, March of next year, and the Board of Inquiry potentially will be up and running The government has yet to confirm, so that this decision about the Board of Inquiry has yet to be made by the Minister for the Environment, Minister of Conservation. That's the next step in the process. That's likely to happen fairly soon. And so the Board of Inquiry will be up and running probably for April to July to hear submissions, and that will put a decision from the Board of Inquiry out in September, October. Key difference between Board of Inquiry and a normal hearing process is that that is a final decision other than High Court appeals on points of law, whereas in the normal process there will be an opportunity for Environment Court appeals and a second run of the hearings. That's the timeline, Mr. Chair. At this point, we are seeking, once again, delegation to a smaller group of elected members to confirm the council's submission on this project, and also the first recommendation is simply that the committee does agree that the council should be making a submission on the project.
Thank you, John. And if I can just go through the A, B and C members that are on your papers, I think they're reasonably straightforward, that we make a submission, that we establish the reference group. We've named the parties there. Thank the Deputy Chair for working that one up. I think we've covered our bases quite well. And C, to delegate authority to that reference group. So I will also now invite the Deputy Chair to refer to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what we have here in terms of D and E with points 1, 2 and 3 on D is on the basis of our understanding that NZTA intend to lodge, and I note that you've put a date December 16th in there, John. I think that we're unsure, but on the understanding that they do intend to lodge in December, this calls for a delay until 2017 for them to do so, a request for them to do so, because we need some clarity and to mitigate some confusion that exists in the community, and very much the affected community of Onehunga in this instance. It is a project of national significance. So what I've mentioned in D1, reference to the community plan, by no means is this series of resolutions an endorsement of that particular alternative plan. It's just simply allowing for NZTA to work through their, in many instances, verbal agreement to undertake an independent peer-reviewed assessment of that community plan. So we would strongly wish for that to take place and, as I've said before, ensure that verbal agreements are honoured. The second point in regards to visual depictions describing the effects of the application, this is also a point that's been very, very clear in very well attended public meetings. There has been a complete lack of visual clarity for what this project, what this current proposed design means and what the impact will be for the community. So asking for that. And then the D3 is on the understanding that if they lodge in December, for all we know, the 20-day working submission period could kick off from then, but we're asking for that to be after February and to maximise public participation in whatever form, groups, individuals that may take. And last E is that the EPA consider an 8-week submission period for this application. It is a complex issue. It is a massive issue, a massive project, and we need to take the time and give it due consideration and encourage maximum participation. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll look forward and hope for my colleagues' support for what I think is just simply mitigation of confusion from members of the community for how this process is unfolding.
Thank you, Councillor Denise Lee. And I just want to add that this amendment has been worked through with staff members, and thanks Councillor Lee, you've been working with the Executive Officer of Chief Planning on this, but I think it's fair to pose the question to John and Ms Pirrett on their reflections on the amendments.
Mr Chair, I don't have any particular concerns with
No concerns with the amendments, Ms Pirrett?
Equally, I don't have any concerns with the amendments. Just in terms of this whole EPA process has been set in to streamline and fast-track decision-making. We know of no situation where the EPA have agreed to extend the submission period, so the committee just needs to be aware of that. Once there is a decision to put it through the EPA process, the EPA themselves are subject to timeframe constraints, and they must hear all the submissions and make a decision. I think it's within 6 months of the decision being made to put it through the EPA process. So obviously asking them to extend the submission process puts them in a more tightened time frame, and you just need to be aware of that if you are requesting that extension.
So, Mr Chair, just to clarify, it's 9 months.
9 months, okay.
From lodgement to decision. So, yeah.
Thank you, Ms Pirrett and Mr Dogood. And I have a question at this stage from Councillor Casey.
It's a concern that such an important project of national significance is delegated to 5 people to, on behalf of the people of Auckland, write the submission, lodge the submission, and basically do the stuff that we've been elected to do. So it's just to say that out loud.
So is there, that's a comment or a question? It's not a question, but...
The question is, what would be the another option that would allow a wider group to approve the submission?
John,
You haven't given us that
given the
option.
timelines, early December, I'm not aware of another meeting that we've got planned. Can you give us some guidance on that?
I suppose, Mr Chair, the Planning Committee meeting, first meeting in February, would be potentially the only option. So if NZTA lodge prior to Christmas and the application is complete, potentially notified, yeah, it could be brought back to the committee, but I guess the benefit of having a smaller working group is we can actually get down into a lot of detail and have potentially multiple meetings. That's probably the primary driver for recommending a small group, is that we can have multiple sessions, not just a single committee meeting to finalise the submission. It's about working up the detail of that submission, having some feedback to officers as to where they're heading with a draft submission. Is the main driver, as well as the overlay of the swift timeline. It's really just to have that opportunity for several sessions, not just one committee meeting.
Yes,
Well, I think it would be really stupid for NZTA to lodge prior to Christmas because there's nobody here, and it would be a really foolish action on their part. That being the case, I think they'll be sensible and lodge it in the new year, and so there's less urgency then for this small.
We just keep it to questions at this point,
Well,
Councillor?
my question is, can we have an option? Well, maybe I'll move an amendment that we have a bigger group, that we have the committee decide on the submission.
Okay, so as we've done in the past, we've delegated authority, and even though we've delegated authority, we have been very generous in distributing drafts around all the members, and we can continue with that practice. Ms Pirrett, do you want to give some guidance on that, on past practices and how we could repeat them to socialise it more fully with the whole of the committee?
So I think there's a number of options that could happen to ensure that people who do want to contribute to the submission can be involved. One is, as Councillor Darby has suggested, that as the drafts of the submission are drawn up with the reference group, they are also shared to other members of the governing body for input, and equally the local board there is a number of members on the reference group. The other option also is that the reference group could invite and have a standing invitation to any workshops they have on this matter to any other member of the governing body to attend the workshop, so they're kept informed. The reason of having a smaller reference group to finalise a submission is just so that we don't get into a round of endless wordsmithing. But the input into the drafts, I'm sure that the reference group would be happy to share with the wider governing body.
Absolutely, I think so. Councillor Cashmore?
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. So, John, must bear in mind that this is a process that's driven by this Board of Inquiry. Will they be actually hearing evidence from general public and other submitters as well?
So the process, the EPA process, is very much like an Environment Court process where they people will be able to put in submissions to this application. The only real difference with the EPA process, it is very fast turnaround, and in the past that has been a challenge for some community groups. But they are invited to hearings. They can put in their submission. They just need to be prepared to react quickly if the EPA asks them questions about the information that they lodge.